The moment the Dominion's 1,200 ships darkened the sky above Earth, every city on the planet went quiet. Not the quiet of surrender, not the quiet of prayer, the quiet of a species drawing a bead. The Dominion called itself the eldest, and for 10,000 years no one had been brave enough to argue. 1,000 worlds wore its yoke, from colony farms to the burned cores of dead civilizations, and its fleets measured their strength in suns rather than in ships. Earth was a footnote in those ledgers, a damp blue rock at the edge of a quiet arm, home to a species rated militarily negligible, interesting only for the stubborn way it refused to die whenever its own planet tried to kill it. The Dominion had conquered beings twice as large by merely showing the banners. It did not expect a war from this world. It expected a formality. High Admiral Tharn of the Third Conquering Fleet was a soldier of tradition, and tradition demanded an opening gesture. So he chose the Wayfarer, a civilian habitat, 30,000 souls, turning in the dark between Earth and its moon. One lance of light crossed the void. One silence took the place of a home. The broadcast that followed played in every language of Earth, over every channel that still functioned, with 8 minutes and 40 seconds left on the clock. Earth had 10 minutes to surrender everything, he said, or every city would follow the Wayfarer into glass. He said the Dominion did not negotiate with lesser species. He said the lesser species were given warnings. He did not notice that the people of Earth were already gone from their streets. There were no riots, no burning districts, no screaming crowds, no frantic static of a civilization collapsing into fear. The cities of Earth had gone quiet, and Tharn, who had taken 40 worlds, had never once heard a quiet like that. His analysts swept the planetary networks and found something worse than panic. On 17,000 channels in 200 languages, the same image, the countdown, ticking away, and beneath it the same caption, repeated by every broadcaster that still drew power. Civilians to the shelters. The rest of us have work to do. The work had been underway for months, because humanity had not been surprised at all. The Third Fleet's approach had been clocked the day it entered human space, by a listening post disguised as a comet. And in the silence since, Earth had done what Earth does best. It had prepared. Railguns that had never fired in anger were being loaded in caverns the scans had dismissed as mines. Silos from the old wars, the ones the Dominion's cartographers had marked as relics, cranked open across 3 continents. Factories that had built tractors that morning were casting warhead casings by noon. A century ago, the Dominion had cataloged humanity's arsenal and found it quaint. Humanity had spent that century building the guns on the other side of the catalog. In the 4th minute, Tharn's first officer asked permission to fire immediately, before the primitive fortifications could complete themselves. Tharn refused. The clock was the entire point. The clock was the demonstration. Let them finish, he said, with the condescension of an empire that believed its ships could not be touched by rocks thrown from a gravity well. Let them spend their last minutes on hope. It will make the lesson cleaner. It was the worst decision made by any admiral in the history of the Dominion, and he would spend the rest of his life, which would be very long and very empty, and spent in a cell built by his prisoners waking from the same dream to watch it happen again. The last minute was the strangest of all. The Dominion watched the people of Earth stop moving, in the cities and the farmlands, in the shelters and on the rooftops of empty streets. They stood in the open, turned their faces to the sky, and were silent. Tharn mistook it for prayer. His analysts mistook it for grief. It was neither. It was something the galaxy had no word for, because the galaxy had never needed one. It was a species making peace with itself, so that it could fight without hesitation, without guilt, without restraint. When the last second bled away, Earth's answer crossed the void, not a surrender, not a request. 2 words spoken in the Dominion's own old tongue, on the Dominion's own command frequency, aimed at the flagship itself. Time's up. The bombardment began 11 seconds later, exactly as planned, and it was the last thing that went according to plan. The lances of the Third Fleet speared down through the atmosphere with the fury of a god punishing a rock. and they struck nothing. The salvos died in the upper sky, chewed apart by a lattice of decoys and counter-battery fire that had been in orbit for years, dressed as junk, too small and too cheap to appear in any threat assessment because hidden in the noise was humanity's entire doctrine, the one the catalog had never listed. Build your guns where the mighty do not look, and when the mighty open fire, answer with rocks. Then the rocks came up. Not the first wave, which was for show, but the second, which was the answer. 100,000 guided projectiles, fire from every corner of the planet, riding trajectories the Dominion's jamming could not touch, because every one of them had been aimed by hand during the 9 minutes of silence. The great shields of the Dominion, tuned over 10,000 years to stop plasma and light and exotic death, were never designed for the oldest truth in combat mass, applied with intent. The guns of Earth had been called primitive for a century. Simplicity, the galaxy was about to learn, was the one thing the ancient empire had never learned to defend against. The battle lasted most of the night. By morning, the greatest expeditionary force ever sent against a single world had become the largest cemetery in the history of the Dominion. They found High Admiral Tharn alone on the bridge of his flagship, the pride of the Empire, hull cracked and drifting with its weapons gone silent, replaying the 10 minutes over and over on the last working screen, in the cold halls of the Dominion's allies, and in the quiet councils of the races that had only watched. That same footage would play for 100 years, and every species that saw it understood the same terrible arithmetic. When the boarding party reached him, Thorn asked his captors the question that would follow him for the rest of his long, empty life. The clock. You used it so calmly. What were you all doing in that final minute? The young officer who answered him still smelled of oil and cordite and the inside of a gun turret. She looked up at him across 10,000 years of arrogance and answered without hesitation. Counting, she said, the ways we'd make you remember.